Thomas Jefferson statue removed from City Hall after 187 years. Thomas Jefferson is no longer in the room where it happens. This is in New York City, City Hall. Art handlers packed up an 884-pound statue of Jefferson in a wooden crate Monday after a mayoral commission voted to banish the likeness of the nation's third president, author of the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, that masterpiece. But they got to get rid of him. The likeness of where it's resided for nearly 2 centuries because he owned slaves. About a dozen workers with Marshall Fine Arts spent several hours carefully removing the painted plaster monument from its pedestals inside the city council chambers and surrounding it with sections of foam and wooden boards. Then they lowered the massive structure down the stairs leading to the building's first-floor rotunda with a pulley system and ushered the founding father out the back door. The 1833 statue will be on a long-term loan to the New York Historical Society, which plans to have Jefferson's model survive in its lobby and reading room. Kerry Butler, executive director of the Public Design Commission that voted to banish the statue, at first tried to block the press from witnessing its removal. Butler relented after members of the mayor's office and city council intervened. The commission also attempted to vote on the statue's removal without a public hearing on the controversial move until the Post revealed the plan. And there he goes. Quote, removing a monument without a public conversation about why it's happening is useless. New Yorkers all need to talk about who we want to honor and why, said Aaron Thompson, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who authored the forthcoming book, Smashing Statues, The Rise and Fall of America's Public Monuments. Thompson said the removal could spark a broader understanding of history. Quote, moving this statue doesn't mean New Yorkers will forget who Thomas Jefferson was, but some of them might learn from the controversy that the man who wrote, quote, all men are created equal, owned over 600 of his fellow humans, Thompson said. Members of the city council were split on the statue's removal from its chambers. Minority leader Joe Borelli called the move an attempt to, quote, sideline history, while Black, Latino, and Asian caucus co-chair Independent Danique Miller said he wanted the statue gone because it doesn't represent contemporary values. The original bronze statue by sculptor Pierre-Jean David is still on display in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. The plaster replica was gifted to City Hall by naval officer and Jefferson admirer Uriah Phillips Levy in 1834. So this is something that I want to talk with all of you about, because this really bothers me. Each of us has our own unique prism. If you and I are standing in the same room with 50 other people, we are each standing in a slightly different spot. And accordingly, our angle of looking at something is going to be mildly different. Even if we're all looking at the same painting, we are all standing in a slightly different spot. The point that I'm trying to make out of this is the very obvious point that no two prisms, no two ways of viewing anything could ever be identical. It'd be very similar. Much as it is in that physical sense, that no two perspectives are identical, that perspectives and framing really changes a lot about how you look at an incident, a story, or any historical figure. And I want to proceed by telling you that, like any sane person, I and billions of others all recognize that slavery was an awful institution, terribly evil, which was a corrupt abuse of civil liberties and harmed countless people, not simply here in America, but throughout the world and pretty much throughout time. Pretty much since Adam and Eve had more than 2 kids, there's been slavery. It's been around for a very long time. And fortunately, for the most part, it's been eradicated throughout the world. For the most part, I say, because there's still some forms of slavery today. And I mean actual slavery, not some stupid leftist saying that, oh, this person's working 8 hours a day and therefore they're a slave to the boss. No, I mean actual genuine slaves. There is slavery today in smaller third world countries. And in any form, slavery is obviously it's a grave injustice. The South used to refer to it as their peculiar institution. Even Southerners recognized they couldn't look at it in the eye, square on. They have to label it a peculiar institution. So yeah, obviously, it's a wonderful thing that slavery was eradicated long, long ago. And I understand that some would argue that there still are some repercussions from that to this day. That's debatable. Meaning, I'm not sure if the suffering of the black community today is because they were slaves or if there are other bases behind it. Meaning, if there was no such thing as slavery ever in the history of America, I'm not sure if the black community would today be a stronger community than they were. The reason I say that is because I think the black community today is worse off than they were in 1955 in many ways. So if it's been deconstructed, the black community has been deconstructing since 1955, how are you blaming that on slavery? I don't really understand that argument. But I want to put all that aside for a moment. Now that I prefaced off talking about the evils of slavery, simply so that no one ever takes these statements I'm about to make out of context. And I want to point out the following. We refer to the founding fathers, and arguably, of all the founding fathers, Jefferson is the father of all fathers. Some would say Washington as the first president and leader of the Revolutionary War. To me, it was always Jefferson, only because he authored the Declaration of Independence. Virginia was perhaps the most influential colony at the time that he wrote it, and he was a Virginian. And his authorship of that document probably went a long way towards getting unanimity of all the colonies, not only because of the elegance of his pen, but just the weight and influence that the colony of Virginia had at the time, that America decided to seek statehood and a complete severance of its ties from England. It was actually a very brave endeavor that we cannot possibly fathom the bravery of that endeavor, only in the sense that nobody had ever broken away from Great Britain before. I think we tend to lose sight of that. I think we're sitting here with our 21st century Western value privilege. And when I say privilege, I don't mean white privilege. I don't mean pretty privilege. I don't mean wealth privilege. I actually mean American privilege, that we as Americans, we who live in this country, all 332 million of us, every single one of us, are grossly privileged compared to most citizens of almost any other state on the planet. The fact that we have running water, the fact that there's abundance of food and clothing and shelters and hell, even healthcare now. What we have here in America is so much greater than anyone has ever had in their history. And I understand the left is always feeling as if they're getting screwed or the poor people are getting screwed. And they're only thinking that because they're comparing themselves to the Jeff Bezos of the world. Not that they hate Jeff Bezos, because he sits there saying, oh, the poor people. But I'm saying that, they look at faceless wealthy people who are never paying their share, because no matter what share they're paying, that's not considered paying their share. And they're basically bitching about anything and everything. This is an injustice and this is an injustice, and we have to take care of climate justice and racial justice and social justice and tree justice and lamp justice and skin justice, all kinds of ridiculous justices, not realizing that you're sitting there like a spoiled little brat bitching about anything and everything rather than actually looking in the mirror and getting off your ass and taking care of whatever plight you think you have. It's just whining and complaining and whining and complaining. And to have the audacity to look back at a historically great human being like Thomas Jefferson. Am I saying that he was without flaws? No, obviously not. He was a human being, like all human beings. He had flaws. He actually fought really hard to abolish slavery against his own best economic interests, against his own personal interests. He fought hard to get rid of it. But you know what? They felt that unanimity of the colonies was more important than slavery. So he caved. Now you can ask yourself, as many on the left would say, well, why didn't he get rid of his slaves? He could have gotten rid of them. No, I think, and I haven't read this anywhere, but I think it's fair to say he had his fields, he had his plantations, and he was perfectly fine with abolishing slavery and paying his workers. But if you're living in an economic institution where you're the only person in the state who's paying your workers and everyone else is quote unquote enjoying the abuse of their fellow man through slavery, he's at a grave economic disadvantage compared to them, as far as just being able to grow his produce and market it. So obviously he's working at a grave economic disadvantage. And I'm assuming that's why he kept his slaves. But we have to bear in mind that in 1776, when he drafted the Declaration of Independence, 1789, when the Constitution was written, slavery was everywhere on the globe, everywhere. And this is why I was talking about perspectives. This is why I was talking about the skewed perspectives, because everyone always looks at from wherever they are in their Western culture, and in this particular Western culture sitting here in freaking America, where it's like if you don't have 2 cell phones and a car, you're underprivileged, and we're sitting here judging people from 250 years ago and saying, You're a terrible, terrible human being. You're a terrible, terrible human being. Well, this guy's trying to actually do something about abolishing slavery, far more than like most other humans at his time. He was a liberal and so far ahead of his time that it is boggling. It is mind-boggling. So in addition to just being the father of all fathers of our country, aside from perhaps George Washington, if he's not number 1, he's certainly number 2 by almost any way you slice it. Yeah, John Adams was up there. There are a bunch of, we all know names of founding fathers. But as far as most influential people, most important persons, you can put Franklin there, obviously. But his efforts and what he did in building this country that built this posh palace that all 332 million of us are sitting here with our American privilege today because of Thomas Jefferson, because of his efforts. Because he wrote the Declaration of Independence, because he influenced other colonies come along, because he said break away from Great Britain and push the other colonies along, because of countless steps that he took that required both brilliance and wisdom and insight and caring about other people, being able to express ideas that were self-evident, but never in the history of man expressed before until he so eloquently expressed it. And to say, oh, we can't have him here because he owned slaves in a period where everyone in the world was a slave owner. I mean, obviously, not everyone in the world was a slave owner, but anyone who was owning plantations in a place that allowed slaves, which was pretty much most of the world, had slaves. You're going to sit here and cast judgment on him like you're some moral superiority? You are a loser. All these leftists, not one of them can hold a candle to Thomas Jefferson intellectually, morally, or in any other respect. And they're sitting there, and she's this woman here. What's her name? This Tompkins woman, or what's her name? I want to know her name. What's her name? Thompson, Erin Thompson, sitting here with casting judgment about the man who wrote "All Men Are Created Equal," owned over 600 of his fellow humans. Oh, for shame on you, Thomas Jefferson. Oh, for shame on you. I am so morally superior, because if I lived in Virginia back in 1789, I for sure would have been the first one to free all of my slaves. You're a liar. You're a liar. And you're sitting here in your freaking ivory tower that you never would have had if not for men like Thomas Jefferson. But you have your perspective, which is not at all based on an 18th century perspective. No, it's a 21st century perspective, which obviously our perspective is about civil liberties and how we treat each other, other humans, and recognizing that all races are equal, and that yes, we all universally today understand that slavery was awful and disgusting and never should have happened ever in the human history, and never should have happened certainly on our shores. But to sit here and cast judgment on our founding fathers and say, oh my God, how could we actually have this statue here? The horror we just discovered. Did you know? Oh my God, did you know? You know what I just learned? Thomas Jefferson had slaves. What the hell is wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with you? You're some morally superior human being. You are a blip in the memory of human history compared to Thomas Jefferson. You are a nobody, a nothing. And you're sitting here casting with your moral superiority and sitting there in your damn throne, your self-appointed knight of the people, like, oh, I'm going to help save humanity in the 21st century by taking down that statue of that evil, evil man. You tear down statues of Lincoln because he didn't pass the civil rights. He didn't pass the civil rights bill. So tear down his statue too. Tear down everyone's statues. Oh my God, Honest Abe, what the hell is wrong with you? You didn't give black people the right to vote. Jesus, Abe, why didn't you let women vote? Disgusting misogynist. You can find any reason to nitpick anybody throughout history. Look at them through your modern day lens as to what's right and what's wrong, which, by the way, our modern day lens is so screwed up, it's beyond belief. It's beyond comprehension. It's humiliating. My descendants, God willing, 100 years from now are going to know I lived in this age here where all of a sudden we decided that transsexuality is not dysphoria. I have to bear that stain. Because of idiots like that. But you're sitting here with your 21st century perspective in your ivory tower, and you're comfortable, and you're comfortable, heated. Certainly, you have indoor plumbing, indoor everything you ever wanted, conveniences that the kings of their age never dreamed of. Conveniences that today there are people in plenty of countries around the world do not enjoy. And that we have because we have the blessings of freedom that we have here in America. And those blessings of freedom come because of our third president, author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. You got to spit on him and say he does not deserve to be viewed by others. People should try and let's not think about him. Let's not think about him. If we just lock him away, put him in the closet there so we don't have to think about it because it's very triggering. It's very, very triggering to think about the fact that he owned slaves. Stop thinking your perspectives are always the best. Maybe start with that. A little freaking hubris. A little bit saying to yourself, you know what? I wasn't alive back then. I don't know where I would have stood on different issues. I don't know if I was in his shoes what I would have done. And yes, I'm familiar with the fact that on a personal level, he had his issues with his slave and the child of the slave. I'm aware of that. I don't care. I don't care how many billions of people had a better life because of that person. You're sitting there on your freaking throne. Oh, well, there's my high horse. Let me go get my ladder so I can climb up my high horse and start telling everyone about how morally superior I am to Thomas Jefferson. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are?